Hey everybody, Rob here at etrailer.com, and today we're going to be taking a look at the SumoSprings front helper springs on our 2004 Workhorse chassis motorhome. Now here at eTrailer we do get a lot of questions, especially when it comes to motorhomes, because let's face it, they're really big vehicles, and if you haven't driven one before, once you get behind the wheel, it can be a little nerve-wracking. And one thing that nobody really talks about is how poorly they handle. And what I mean by that is the way that they drive. Sure, the insides are very nice, they're comfortable. Once you get on the road, they don't handle very well because they are very top heavy and there's a lot of area for the wind to catch. So we end up getting pushed around on the highway, or if we're taking a sharp turn, it feels really top heavy, we start feeling like we're leaning. Well, by the time we're getting where we're going to be exhausted because we're shifting around in our seats so much, fighting the steering wheel, and trying to keep our motorhome driving straight. Not to mention all the passengers in the back and all of our gear, it ends up getting tossed around and it's just not an enjoyable thing. But that's where our SumoSprings are going to help. They're going to alleviate a lot of those problems. When we're driving down the road, it's going to cut down on that body roll. So if we do have a big gust of wind come by and it pushes against the side, we're not going to have to fight as much. We're not going to get that leaning and kind of mushy, soft feeling going in and out of the turns. And especially when it comes to bumps, it's definitely going to soften them up a little bit and give us a lot smoother of a ride. Now, if you're looking for a full upgrade, if you're having problems with sway, possibly bouncing, kind of a jarring feeling, the front up here is definitely going to help with the SumoSprings, but there's also rear SumoSprings available, and that way we can have full support from the front all the way to the back of our motorhome. And the SumoSprings in the back here are definitely going to help out, especially if you flat tow a vehicle. Because once you have all that weight back here, it kind of starts to wag the back end of your motorhome. And once the back end starts moving, it wants to pivot the front end the other way, which then again, we end up fighting that steering wheel and really trying to keep control of our motorhome, which ends up leading to a not enjoyable ride. But the SumoSprings are definitely going to stiffen everything up, give us a lot more stability, and make it that much easier to tow our vehicle. So now that we have everything installed and in place on our motorhome, let's go ahead and take our test course and see exactly how much improvement we got and how our motorhome handles. So we're first going to come up to our bumps course. We'll be going over the bumps right about 5 miles an hour. Now I can definitely feel an improvement over the factory ride. Don't get me wrong, the bumps are still there. But once we get over them, there's not an overwhelming rocking feeling. It still rocks a little bit, but it seems to settle out pretty quickly and we're back on our way. Now we're going to come up to our slalom course. We're going to be going through that about 10 miles an hour. But we're just going to go in and out of the turns to see how much body roll we have and how much it actually reduces. I can immediately tell a pretty good difference. It doesn't handle like a sports car, but it definitely is a lot more stable than when it first started, and it's a lot easier to keep control of the motorhome as I'm going in and out of the turns. And it doesn't have so much of a leaning feeling, it just generally wants to go into the turn and come out of the turn rather than leaning really hard and then turning. It's a lot more stable. It doesn't feel as soft and mushy and have so much of that body rolling feeling to it. And really the big difference here is even just the small potholes and the bumps going through the parking lot, they definitely have calmed down a lot. Not that they're gone, they're still there, you can still feel them, but it's not a jarring kind of jolty feeling resonating through the seat. It's just a mild bump, and like I said, once you get over it, it's pretty much gone, settles down. So here's what our SumoSprings look like once we have them installed. They're actually going to replace our factory Jounce stops. They mount to the bottom of the frame, and you can see they're going to make contact with the front axle. That way, whenever we're driving, they're going to provide us that support we need so we don't have so much bouncing and jarring feeling when we're driving down the road. These are really going to greatly increase the stability of our motorhome, because the construction of these are made out of a microcellular urethane, so they're going to definitely absorb a lot of those bumps and shocks as we're driving, smoothing out our ride. Now the nice thing too is that we're going to have one on each side of the axle right on the bottom of the frame, but since they're not connected, they're going to work independently from each other, so it's definitely going to help out with a lot of those sway feelings. Definitely going to feel like our motorhome's not as top heavy, because when we go into a turn, one side is going to come down and compress while the other side is going to stretch out. Well, since they're going to be fighting each other, it's going to naturally want to try to come back to nice and level, and as it progressively starts to squish down, it's going to become more stiffer, because our springs actually have a progressive rate to them. Which really what that means is the harder we press down, or the more weight that's put on top of them, the stiffer they're going to become and the more support they're going to provide us. When we don't have a lot of weight on them, or we're not pushing down on them really hard, they're going to have a soft engagement, so we're not going to have to worry about this really jarring, shocking feeling coming from the front end. And the thing I really like about the SumoSprings is that when they do compress, they're not going to bulge out to the side too dramatically. They're going to compress vertically and have very minimal side-to-side expansion, which is nice because we're not going to have to worry about any nearby components potentially damaging the springs, or the springs damaging the other components. Now, unlike airbags, I think the best thing about our SumoSprings is the fact that they're completely maintenance-free. Once we have them in, we can completely forget that they're there, and we can just enjoy our motorhome. Airbags are going to require us to monitor the air pressure that's inside the bags, not to mention the installation is going to be a lot more involved than these. You're going to have to run lines, mount brackets, and a lot of other things. These are going to simply bolt onto the frame. We're not going to have to drill or cut anything at all. Now, I know motorhomes go all over the country and see a lot of different environments. And the great thing about our SumoSprings is that we're not going to have to worry about any kind of environmental things that are going to start breaking it down. The urethane is going to be resistant to most automotive chemicals like oil, gasoline, and even UV rays. We shouldn't have too much problems with that since it's underneath the motorhome, but rest assured we shouldn't have to worry about any kind of environmental issues or even temperatures. If we're down in the desert where it gets extremely hot, shouldn't have to worry about these because these can withstand temperatures up to 200 degrees Fahrenheit, or if we're up in the mountains where it gets extremely cold, these can withstand up to negative 25 degrees Fahrenheit below zero, so we know that these are going to last us a really long time. Our front SumoSprings are going to have a weight rating of 1,500 pounds. Now that's going to be at 50% compression, but just keep in mind that's not an increase to the payload of your motorhome. Our SumoSprings are really there just to help support the extra weight of our motorhome and give us a nice smooth ride so we can actually enjoy it. Now that we've seen what our SumoSprings look like and gone over some of the features, let's make sure you have the confidence to do it at home, and we'll show you how to get them installed. And the great thing about it is we're not even going to have to lift the motorhome off the ground. You can use the leveling jacks to lift it up just enough, and we don't even need any special tools. In fact, let's go ahead and do the whole process together. To start our installation, we want to park our motorhome on a nice flat level surface, and I always recommend using the parking brake. Now we need to lift up our motorhome, and I understand that nobody at home has a lift big enough to lift their motorhome, but we don't need to lift it to where it's off the ground. You can see that our front tires are still in contact with the ground, but we used our leveling jacks to stretch the suspension out, so we have a little bit of room in between the frame and the axle. Now we can move underneath, and we're going to move directly under the front end right to the front axle. Right at the front axle, and here's the frame member right above it. Now we're going to have our factory Jounce stops. These are bolted in, and the easiest way that I've found to remove these is if you just grab the Jounce stop, we're going to twist it just to break it loose a little bit. But you see this frame member here, it's open behind there, and there's actually a nut that's holding our Jounce stop in. So you're going to grab yourself a 9/16 wrench. We'll come in behind that plate. You want to hold that nut with the wrench as you grab the Jounce stop and turn it. That way we can loosen everything up. Now typically you can get this kind of wedged into the frame and then start turning it. That way you don't have to actually hold the wrench, you just let the frame hold it for you. Once you have it unthreaded, you should be able to reach into the frame rail. We're going to pull out a washer. There'll be a split lock washer in there. And we're also going to have a hex nut. I want to go ahead and pull those pieces out of the frame, and we can set our Jounce bumper aside because these pieces are not going to get reinstalled. Then we can grab our Sumo spring. We want to remove the nut off the top. There's also going to be a split lock washer on the stud as well. So we'll pull that off. And we just want to feed the stud into the same hole that we removed our Jounce bumper from. And then on the inside of the frame, we'll follow it up with that lock washer. Making sure it goes over the stud. And then securing it down with that lock nut. Now typically it's easiest just to get it started, even if it is a little loose. Just make sure the nut's threading on there. But since it's a lock nut, usually you can't get it too tight by hand. So we're going to leave it a little loose, but we'll grab a 13mm wrench. And using that same method of just holding the nut on the inside, we're going to tighten up our Jounce bumper to the top of it is nice and snug and flat against the bottom of the frame. Now that it's nice and snug, pull the wrench out, and that's the exact same way we're going to put in the other side. So we're going to move over to the other side, pull the Jounce bumper out, and install our new spring over there using the same combination of hardware. You just want to make sure that your new spring isn't spinning around and that you get it pretty snug, but again, grabbing the spring and tightening it while you're using a wrench to hold it will get it nice and snug. Just make sure it's not moving. But with all that being said, again, I'm Rob here at etrailer.com, and that'll finish up your look at the SumoSprings Helper Springs on our 2004 motorhome.